A royal wedding in Paris. Within hours, thousands of bodies clogged the Seine. I've read the accounts myself, dozens of them, written by men who were there. What strikes you first isn't the scale of the killing, it's how normal everything looked the day before. August 1572. Paris was bright, festive. The streets were packed for a wedding that was supposed to heal a nation split down the middle by religion. Nobody knew they were walking into a trap, not yet. The bride was Margaret of Valois, Catholic, French royalty. The groom was Henry of Navarre, Protestant, powerful, dangerous to the crown. When King Charles Roman IX approved this marriage in early August, it looked like peace. The two sides would unite through blood. Protestants called them Huguenots, Catholics saw heretics. This wedding was meant to bridge that chasm. It was actually a dagger being sharpened. August 18, 1572. The wedding ceremony itself went off without incident. Thousands gathered. The mood was cautiously hopeful. But I want you to understand what the key players already knew. Catherine de Medici, the Queen Mother, had made a decision days earlier. She and her advisors had drafted a list of names. Huguenot leaders. Dangerous men who needed to disappear. The wedding wasn't the cause, it was the cover. August 23rd, 3 days after the vows. This is where the timeline matters because none of the Huguenots sleeping in Paris that night knew what was coming. Admiral de Coligny, one of their most respected commanders, was staying in a house near the Louvre. He'd been warned. A messenger had told him there was a plot. He didn't believe it, or he believed it too late. The bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois began ringing around midnight. Not the usual bells, sharp, urgent tolls that cut through the sleeping city like a signal. And that's exactly what they were, the signal. Soldiers and Catholic militia, prepositioned throughout Paris, knew what those bells meant. The hunt had started. Coligny's house was surrounded. When the attackers burst in, he was already wounded. An earlier assassination attempt had left him injured. He was in bed, defenseless. One account says he called out, asking who was there. Another says he died recognizing one of the killers. The specifics blur. What's clear, his body was thrown from a window into the street below. 6 hours later, the sun was rising over Paris, and the streets were already slick with blood. The killing wasn't random, not entirely. The militia had the list. They knew which streets to patrol, which houses to break into. But panic spreads faster than any plan. Once the violence started, it fed on itself. Citizens joined in. Neighbors turned on neighbors. The vendetta became a massacre. By daylight, the Louvre's courtyard had become an execution ground. Huguenot nobles, men with titles, with families, with political power, were being dragged in and killed in front of the royal family. King Charles Roman IX reportedly watched from a window. Whether he gave orders or simply allowed it to happen, the distinction becomes meaningless when you're watching men die and doing nothing to stop them. The Seine began to choke with bodies. I've read reports from people who saw the river days later, corpses tangled in the reeds, swollen and bloated, drawing vultures and disease. The water itself became a mass grave. Some historians estimate 3,000 dead in Paris alone. Others say 5,000. The truth is we'll never know exactly. The bodies were disposed of too quickly, too carelessly, to count with precision. What haunts me about reading the accounts is the ordinariness of the killers. Not fanatics, not soldiers following orders in a war. Ordinary Parisians, shopkeepers, servants, minor officials who saw an opportunity and took it. Settling debts, stealing property. The religious fury was real, but so was the basic human greed underneath it. The massacre became a license for theft and murder dressed up in theology. The killings spread beyond Paris. Over the following weeks, Huguenot communities in Lyon, Toulouse, and a dozen other cities were targeted. Provincial governors, some with genuine religious conviction and some just following orders from the capital, unleashed their own violence. The massacre metastasized. By autumn, somewhere between 10 and 30,000 Protestants had been murdered across France. A wedding had become a purge. Here's what the conspirators didn't anticipate, and this is crucial to understanding what happened next. The massacre didn't crush the Protestant movement in France, it hardened it. Survivors went underground, they organized, they armed themselves. Within a generation, France would be locked in a series of religious wars that would tear the kingdom apart far worse than any single night of violence could have done. The conspiracy itself remains contested. Catherine de Medici almost certainly knew. King Charles Roman IX almost certainly approved. But there's a layer of deniability built into the record, conversations we don't have transcripts of, decisions made in whispers. Some historians argue the massacre was spontaneous, that the violence spiraled beyond what the crown intended. I've read enough political conspiracies to know that's how they always claim it went. The cover story is always it got out of hand. What we know for certain, the Pope celebrated. He had a medal struck commemorating the massacre. Protestant nations across Europe went into shock. England, the Netherlands, the German states, they all understood what had happened. A royal government had organized the slaughter of its own citizens based on religion. The message was clear: conversion or death, loyalty or the river. In the years after, France never fully recovered from what it had done to itself. The religious wars continued until 1598, when Henry of Navarre, the same groom from that wedding, became King Henry Roman IV and issued the Edict of Nantes, granting Protestants limited rights. Peace came, but only after decades of blood, and even that peace was fragile, temporary. The conspiracy's architects faced no real consequences. Catherine de' Medici died in 1589 in her bed, surrounded by power. King Charles Roman IX died 3 years after the massacre, plagued by guilt and illness. But plagued by guilt isn't justice. It's just what people say when the guilty die. History is littered with conspirators who never answered for what they ordered. What lingers in my mind after reading through centuries of accounts is how quickly it happened. A wedding on August 18th, a signal bell on August 23rd. By August 24th, thousands were dead. The machinery of state violence, once activated, moves with terrible efficiency. The conspiracy wasn't just the plot, it was the infrastructure. The soldiers, the lists, the willingness of ordinary people to participate. All of it was already in place. The wedding was just the trigger. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre sits at the intersection of everything that makes political violence possible: religious fervor, dynastic ambition, a population divided and afraid, and leaders willing to cross the line. It's not ancient history. The conditions that made it happen are still present in the world. The only variable is whether someone presses the trigger. If you want to understand how power moves in the shadows, subscribe. There's a new conspiracy waiting every week.